This book hurt me so much it made me cry. I am talking about straight up sob. It wasn't pretty. I was sitting up in the middle of the night, just tears streaming down my face. Hello book lovers, my name is Carrie Rogers and this is Spines and Spoilers. Hello, this is future Carrie. I just wanted to go ahead and apologize for the fact that the screen is partially obstructed. Where I was sitting, I couldn't really tell that it was obstructed because it was being held up by another book. But anyway, I'm going to let you get back to the video and I hope that you enjoy it. Today I'm going to do my November reading wrap-up, but first I'm going to go over what I'm reading and what I'm drinking. Right now I am listening to Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid, but I'm not actually drinking anything at the moment, which is super weird for me. Usually I'll have like 3 drinks lined up at a time. It's a problem. But today, just water, and not even that right now. I don't know what's going on. I don't know who I am. The first book that I read in November that was from my TBR was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. I did a whole reading vlog on this one. I really enjoyed it. I think I ended up giving it 4 stars because it lagged a little bit. But otherwise, I ended up really enjoying this book way more than I expected. Usually prequels are a little contrived, I would say, or a little bit cheesy. This one kind of stuck with the tone of the other books for the most part. There was a little bit of a lapse in a couple of different places, which is another reason that the points got knocked down. But for the most part, it stuck with the tone of the first books and then kind of ran with it and added more lore to it. Basically, it follows the journey of President Snow from the time of him being about 15 or 16 years old, wherein we find out that he was almost homeless. He was completely broke, and it kind of just goes from there. We see how the Hunger Games as they are today in the current books came to be. They technically exist during this time period, but not in the way that it would in the present day book. The Hunger Games, while President Snow was growing up, was basically the equivalent of them collecting 24 kids from the districts and throwing them into an arena, having them fight, just gladiator style. There was no razzle-dazzle to it. There were not really any interviews or anything. All of the showmanship came afterwards, and largely because of President Snow. And we kind of see how he contributed to all of that. It was really interesting to see why President Snow is the way he is, and also why he doesn't like District 12, which is covered in this to an extent. So yeah, if you liked the Hunger Games and you're okay with prequels, then I would suggest giving this one a shot. If you don't like prequels, maybe steer away. I generally am kind of hit or miss with them, and I liked it, so but yeah, that was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. The next book is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. And first of all, let's just take a second to appreciate this cover because it is one of the most aesthetically pleasing covers I've ever seen. That could just be because I love snakes though, who knows. Anyway, this was a good one. I think I gave it about 4.5 stars. It had a little bit of everything. It was a little bit more on the harsh side though. Basically, the main character is able to see ghosts, and this affects her life in really negative ways for the most part. People think that she's talking to herself throughout her entire life. She sees all kinds of gory, disturbing things and quickly discovers the rules of being able to see ghosts and getting them to not engage with you. A Ivy League institution notices her abilities, and they end up taking her under their wing basically, and using her for her powers because they are dabbling in some occult shit with a secret society. So yeah, if you like dark academia, occult stuff, ghosts, all that supernatural stuff, give it a try. There are, however, also dark elements in this book. There's a lot of drug use, there's overdosing, there's murder, there's all kinds of fun stuff. There's attempted rape. So yeah, just know that going in that it gets pretty dark at times. This next book is the last one that I have a physical copy of, and that is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I'm pretty sure that's how you say her name. I think I gave this one a 4.5 or a 4, I'm not sure. I think it was closer to a 4. But this one was a really fun ride. I enjoyed it. I loved how the characters were all fleshed out. I want to learn more about them, and I cannot wait to read the rest of the series. The Raven Boys, the protagonist is named Blue. She lives with a family who's just brimming with psychic energy, basically. All of them have psychic powers, but she's the only one who didn't really get one that she considers to be particularly influential. She's basically able to amplify the energy of others. So the other members of her family basically use her to sort of amplify their powers whenever they need to do something that's particularly important. There is also a prophecy that when she kisses her true love, he will die. While helping her mom with basically a psychic mission of sorts, she is able to see a spirit, which she's never been able to before. She's never been able to see spirits. That is not one of her powers. And the only thing that she's really able to say to him is, "What's your name?" He says, "Gansey," and she's like, "Is that it?" And he says, "Yeah, that's it. That's all there is." And she finds out that the only reason she would able to have this connection, the only reason she would be able to have this connection, rather, is if she killed this guy or he was her true love. Either way, this is not a good sign, because she sees him during the ceremony that her mom is performing in order to see the souls of people who are going to die that year. So either way, this guy is going to die, whether it's at her hands or at someone else's. And there's also the chance that he could be her true love, which she's really struggling with. So this book is basically about how their paths cross and where things lead from there. I am going to say that I thought going into this that it might end up being a supernatural romance of sort, and it's not. It's not really a romance at all. Like, there are moments where she has to consider things like romance, but for the most part, it's more supernatural fantasy, basically. Some of the things that I would give you a heads up about are kidnapping. There is kidnapping involved, being held at gunpoint, murder. There's also homelessness and parental abuse. These next 3 books I did not have a physical copy of, but they were on my November TBR. This next book is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. I ended up giving this book a 4.5 out of 5, and that is only because I felt like it was too short. I felt like we needed some more character development from some characters. I felt like some characters just needed more screen time. I wanted to know more about this world that they were creating, this universe that they were creating, the rules that were established for the magic therein. I actually did not know going into this book that it was a romance or that the main character was trans, but I figured that out pretty quickly, and oh my goodness, I ended up loving it all the more because of it. The LGBTQIA+ representation in this book is wild and made me so happy. The fact that the character is trans is kind of baked into the plot, but not in an upsetting way. So the plot basically circulates around the idea that the main character is part of this family that is essentially called the Brew. Now, it is very binary in the fact that there are men, there are women, and that's it. They don't really consider non-binary into the equation. They don't consider agender people. They don't consider trans people. That's not even a conversation that they've had. So the fact that the main character has come out as trans has become a point of contention within this family of people, because they don't really know what to do with him. So he has to deal with a lot of transphobia and surprisingly not a lot of homophobia, surprisingly, but just lots and lots of transphobia from all of his family. And some people just don't, they just pretend he's not there, basically. Some don't engage him in conversation, others like actively roll their eyes. Some treat him completely differently or dead name him or just try to get him to do duties which in that society are considered to be feminine. In order to prove himself as a man, he ends up getting a totem of sorts which are only available to the men of this family. The women are not able to get these totems of sorts, at least not in this way. Their totem is basically rosemary beads, whereas for the men it's a dagger. And the women generally have the power of healing. The men have the power to summon and release spirits, basically. The knight, however, that the main character goes to acquire this item, which he successfully does, thus validating his gender. He plans on taking this protege back to his family to prove the fact that he is male and that Lady Death recognizes him as male. And before he can get back, his cousin Miguel is murdered. And he knows this because there is basically a link of sorts to everyone within the family so that they know whenever one of them is in trouble or one of them is dying or dead. So he gets it in his mind that if he can find Miguel and basically summon his spirit in order to release him into the afterlife, that this would prove even more that he is worthy of being considered a brujo. This brujo for men and bruja for women. And the story just kind of takes off from there. He accidentally summons a spirit named Julian, who is like the bad boy of his high school, or at least that is the rumor, who apparently died only an hour before. And there starts to be speculation that maybe these two deaths are linked together. But in the meantime, he has to find Julian's friends so that he can make sure that they're okay. And slowly over time, he starts to realize that Julian isn't really a bad guy. And I will leave it there so that I don't spoil anything else for you because that was a lot of information. But either way, I really love this book. I feel like it could have been 5 stars if it was a little longer and had taken a little more time to flesh out some of the characters and more of the universe. The next book is The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. I didn't know what to expect going into this book, but I ended up giving it 5 stars, surprisingly. I didn't necessarily think that there would be any more 5-star books this year, but apparently there were. So The Hollow Places kind of reminded me of Gravity Falls meets Narnia meets horror. Like, it has a bit of silly, a bit of whimsical, and just a bit of absolute terror. One thing that I found out early on, though, that made me really giddy was the fact that this book, The Hollow Places, is set in North Carolina. Like, I never read books that are set in my home state. It never happens. What was extra cool was it referenced an area that I worked in specifically, which is inhabited mostly by retired snobby golfers. And is just full of golf courses as far as the eye can see. And I just thought that was really cool hearing them describe it the same way that I would have. Like, I don't even like this state that much. But yeah, I've always considered myself kind of half and half because my mom is from North Carolina and my dad is from New York. So I've never felt like I am fully a North Carolinian or a New Yorker. But after that short tangent, this story revolves around a main character who is going through a divorce. She goes to stay with her uncle in North Carolina at a museum of oddities, basically. And she's going to help him basically run his shop while she gets her life back together. While she's there, she runs into an old acquaintance of sorts, and they kind of reconnect a little bit. And she enlists his help in fixing up the place a little bit. And while they are fixing it up, they find this mysterious hallway that was definitely not there before to their knowledge. It doesn't make sense being where it is. It should not physically be able to exist. So they go poking around a little bit too much. And first they find a dead body and they're like, that's not good. They keep poking around and find out that it is a portal to another world. And this world is terrifying. This is where the tension starts to build. There isn't necessarily a lot of action throughout the entire thing. There's a lot of tension building up. But there are creatures in this world who are able to read thoughts. And one of the writings that they find on the wall is basically, pray that they are hungry. And they find out that this is because if they catch you and they are not hungry, then they will essentially torture you. They will take you apart and try to see what makes you tick. So that's definitely, a trigger warning you should be aware of, torture. But essentially, they get caught in this area, this other dimension, and I will leave it from there. Because I don't want to spoil anything else for you. It was a really interesting book. It was oddly really silly at times, which was surprising, that they could mix horror and silly so well, but I really enjoyed it for that reason. It might bother other people. I don't know, but I thought it was fun. The next book from my November TBR list, and the last one that was on that list, was The Diviners by Libba Bray. However, I did not finish that book. I DNF'd it again because it started sending me into a reading slump again. This is the second time. I don't know if I'm going to give it a third try. Either way, I got maybe a third of the way in, I think, and it was slipping through my brain like water and was making me actively dread reading a little bit. Like whenever I thought about reading, I found something else to do. But yeah, that's really unfortunate because I was very interested and wanted to read it this time. But I might give it one more try in the future. I'm not sure right now though. I can't do it. Haha, I lied. There's one more. There is one more book that was on my November TBR. I just overlooked it. That is The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. This was another really good one. It follows these women who ended up being final girls. They were attacked by a serial killer of sorts, and were the sole survivors. And what truly is supposed to make them final girls is the fact that they had to kill their attackers. The main character in this is one of the final girls who didn't end up killing her attacker, but essentially ended up playing dead. Which I can't blame her, because what happened to her was she was stuck up on a pair of antlers. There's no way that she could have helped anyone. Lots of trigger warnings. Murder, rape, gore, assault, drugs. I'm sure there will be more. But yeah, this was a really interesting one to read. I really liked seeing how the anxiety and paranoia were kind of manifesting in the main character and how it was depicted. There was a part in the middle that kind of lost me, which is why I think it only ended up getting 4 stars. Would recommend if you like Grady Hendrix's work, which his work I feel like is kind of hit or miss. Either you love it or you hate it. And if you are okay with the topic of like murder and slashers and stuff like that. Otherwise, maybe steer clear, because there's a lot of talk about trauma and anxiety and paranoia and drug abuse and the effects that trauma can have on people and the ways that it can manifest in present day. This next set of books are basically ARCs, advanced reader copies, that I got from NetGalley to read. This first ARC is The Mermaid in the Mill Pond by Lucy Strange. But this book was a little back and forth. Apparently it is intended for children. I did not know that going in. I thought it was maybe a middle grade or YA. But it circulates around a girl who has lost her parents. She is an orphan and she's been sent to work in a workhouse. Because she has been burned so much, she basically has this motto that she's not going to help anyone. She's not going to get close to anyone but herself, otherwise that's how you get hurt. Or in her mind, that's also how you end up hurting others unintentionally. That being said, another girl ends up showing up at this workhouse and is very full of life and hope, and is just this giddy child who brings a little bit of light to her life. At first she resists having anything to do with her, but they slowly become friends over time. But during all this, she hears a legend of a mermaid that lives in a pond next to the workhouse. and she soon discovers that the mermaid is real, but isn't really anything like the mermaids that we would think of. She's more fish than human. She ends up relating to the mermaid, though, because the mermaid is stuck in a pond, and mermaids are supposed to be in oceans or lakes or something like that. Not in ponds, not in teeny tiny little bodies of water. So she starts trying to come up with a plan to move the mermaid to a different body of water. And with this comes the idea of her own escape from the situation that she is in. By the way, it's a really cute book. It's not really for my age group. I'm not really in the demographic for the people who should be reading it, but I think I gave it a 3.5. It is darker than I would have expected. If you are going to read it to your children, just be aware that there is abuse. Like, it's pretty bad. Like, there's verbal abuse, there's physical abuse, and these children are repeatedly put in really dangerous situations. There's also neglect. So definitely be mindful of that and the fact that they're not subtle about it. But I think that decision falls with the parent and the children involved. This next book is by Hilary Fitzgerald Campbell. It's called Murder Book, and it is a graphic novel which explores how obsessed our society has kind of become with true crime. It also kind of explores her own relationship with true crime and the legacy that it has become, because her grandmother loved true crime, her mother loved true crime, and now she does as well. So it's kind of a familial thing at this point. But this is another form of media that has managed to marry the ideas of horror and comedy. But yeah, I really enjoyed that one. I think I ended up giving it about 4 stars. There wasn't necessarily a lot wrong with it, but at times it was a little harder to engage than others, and it did go on a little bit long, a little bit longer than I would have expected for a graphic novel about this topic. Otherwise, I really enjoyed it, though. The next book, or the next arc rather, that I read during November was a book called Woman Eat Me Whole. It is a poetry book by Ama Asantewe Diaka, and I did not enjoy it. I hate to say it, but I enjoyed some of it. Some of her wording was beautiful, but the fact is that this book was meant to focus on women. That is the focus of the book. And it entirely excludes trans women and non-binary women from the discussion. It is entirely about cis women, which is very problematic. I think I ended up giving it a 2.5 because of the fact that it was problematic, and that the fact that some of it seemed a little bit self-important. And this is the reason that J.K. Rowling isn't really welcome in a lot of bookish spaces anymore, because of the fact that she's a TERF, a trans-exclusive radical feminist. She does not consider trans women to be women or non-binary women to be women. They are not considered in the conversation for her, and that is what I get from this book. This next book was another 5-star, but it also hurt me. This book hurt me so much, it made me cry. Like, I'm not even talking like a little bit, I am talking about straight up sob. It wasn't pretty. I was sitting up in the middle of the night, just tears streaming down my face. Ugly cry. But that book is The Whale Library by Zidru and Judith Vanistindale. I had to have my phone because I couldn't remember how to pronounce that last name. Now, I'm not going to talk about this book a lot because I don't want to ruin anything, but I will say that it hurt me. And that I went in expecting it to be a children's book, and it is not. It is an adult folktale, basically, circulating around this man who delivered mail to ships, basically, and this whale who has a library inside of her, which is just a cool, whimsical prospect. And it's a delightful book, I will say that. I loved it so much. But it hurt me enough that I'm about to start crying again, and I don't want to do that. But yeah, this is another one that is relatively more adult, so I would read it yourself before deciding whether you want it to be read by your children. You yourself, however, should definitely read it, because while it hurt me, it is wholesome, it is delightful. I want to read it again. I want a physical copy of it, legitimately. this next one is another one that I didn't like, which is unfortunate. It's called Somebody Loves You by Mona Archie, and it is another book of poetry. Now, this being said, I like poetry. I do like poetry. There's a lot of poetry that I do enjoy. I just did not enjoy these two books of poetry. One, because it is exclusionary and just like not as good as I thought it would be. And this one because it's kind of poetry mixed with prose, for one thing, and also it would not stay in my brain for anything. It is the most boring book I've ever read. I think I also gave it a 2.5 because of the fact that there were moments where the writing was pretty, and it's evident that they know how to write, but maybe they shouldn't be telling narratives. I don't know. Now that I'm thinking about it, now that I'm reflecting on this book, 2 stars might have been more appropriate because I read the whole thing and my brain was numb, totally numb. It was not good, and I'm very sorry to Mona Archie. I'm sure that you have an audience out there. I am not saying anything about her as a person, but for me, I kept waiting for it to get good for me to start enjoying the book, and it never happened from beginning to end. And it's unfortunate because it's an interesting premise. It really is. But that's all I'm going to say on that book. I don't want to beat up on it. I don't want to be a bully to Mona Archie because this book wasn't problematic. It just was not for me. Okay, this last book that I read in November is another graphic novel. It is called Spectre Inspectors by Bowen McCurdy and Caitlin Musto. And I really liked this one. It's another graphic novel, and I'd say it's somewhere between like middle grade and YA. There is gay though, there is positive LGBTQIA plus representation, there's a non-binary character, there are 2 lesbians, and it's handled in a way that's not like preachy, it's not like forced in your face, it just is. And this group of children, they're kind of like a Scooby-Doo gang of sorts. They have decided that they are going to start hunting ghosts and that they are going to record it on camera. One of them is a medium, is actually able to see ghosts and talk to them, but everyone else just mostly believes that they don't exist and are going along with what she is saying. I really loved all of the characters in this. I love the plot, I love the settings, I love the imagery, and I think I ended up giving it a 4.5 out of 5. I enjoyed it a lot. I recommended it to my 14-year-old stepdaughter because I think that she would really like it, honestly. It did very much feel like a modern day Scooby-Doo without the animal and kind of like stepped up a notch a little bit. Like there were some elements of it that were genuinely creepy. I wouldn't say that it was scary, but you know, a little bit creepy. But overall, I think it was good. Apparently it is a series and I would like to read the rest of it, honestly. It's called Spectre Inspectors. And I want to keep an eye out for it and maybe read more of it in the next year. Would definitely recommend it though for anyone middle grade and up. I don't know if elementary schoolers would necessarily be able to handle some of the imagery in it. But again, that is entirely up to you. I'm not going to tell you how to raise your kids. And that wraps up my reading wrap-up for November of 2021. It feels really good to be doing these again. I can't even express how good this feels. But thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it more than I could express. Don't forget to like and share and subscribe. And most importantly, love yourself. All right, bye.